Ah, ah, it's really dark. And there's a lot you can see with cameras. I don't know how much if this is real and how much of this is artifacts, how pimply I am and dotty. This mostly looks like just what the sensor sees if it's a load of tiny holes. Sometimes you can see stuff that looks like unseen things. The last few days, I had it really hard on circles. I don't think I've ever had. No, I haven't. Like 3 or 4 days just writing about circles. It's good because when I get back to circles, it usually means like, here's the stuff that's not ambiguous. I got that one thing popping out in my mind about where I went. So that's P is not MP. Trying to relate the integer yolks wavelets to transcendental areas that pop out. I feel pretty tired. I feel pretty tired after waking up after 3 days of doing circly things. Yesterday I messed around writing about a social media platform, and I like the idea of cliques coming together. That seems good, and a social media platform that's sort of designed from the beginning, trying to figure out, well, how are you going to meet new people, and how are we not going to have thought bubbles? That's the same problem. That seems kind of cool, but I'm really just interested in what now? Well, maths at the moment. What can we say? Is there something that we would like to say more on PNP? Because obviously that's never how I've conceived of it before, that it's a gap between those little places. And I don't really want to ask anyone to believe me on that too much. Although it seems fair, right? That there's some questions that we could ask in the integer plane. That we just can't ask if we're talking about areas. Yeah, that's how I had always imagined PNP, basically. And also the difference between dimensions, which I suppose at this point I've said a decent amount on, kind of like where dimensions meet. And we've got more on that where dimensions meet is also kind of the difference between laminar flow and turbulent flow. Like, in the same way as we had points that above them are arbitrarily many points, if we have something that's flowing and they're all parallel to each other, all the motions are parallel to each other, and then you want to force it into a new dimension, one way to consider that is that everything goes perpendicular. Everything goes as perpendicular as it can, and maybe everything goes as perpendicular to itself. Like if one force is pushing out into another dimension, then as soon as any bit of that hits into another dimension, it's got to go at 90 degrees, because that's what we mean by another dimension. But there's actually a load of choices about how and where it goes to 90 degrees, and it's got to do all of them. And I think what we see a lot in physics that we don't quite understand yet is that when you have that kind of system where something's like pushed through into a more dimensional hole, in specifically this case where there is no like laminar flow and there is no particular reason for everything to behave well nicely ordered once it comes out of the hole. Instead, what it's got to try and do, and like maybe teleologically, it's now the, well, why does that happen? But it seems to want to push in all the different possible right-angled solutions. It wants to fill up the area space of what could I have possibly done in turning out 90 degrees. I think turbulent flow wants to make like every shape with inside it. I say that, and I've always said that, and I've looked at it, and that's really not like it doesn't make any octagons, right, or nonagons. Well, it's hard to tell because we're always going to have this thing about immeasurability that there's only. Okay, so I go, oh, it's never going to make a nonagon, right? As if that's funny. But actually, if you have the thing I've just described and it were to make a perfect circle, not only would that be weirder, you would never be able to test that. So maybe it's okay to say, you know, every shape that's not a circle is gonna come out of that system. And if that were the case, then you would need some kind of process for cycling through all the shapes. It wouldn't be it wouldn't be a linear process of cycling through the shapes because you're cycling through 2D shapes. You would in fact be cycling through, yeah, the cross section of a 3D thing. If you were cycling through 2D shapes, and they're all continuous 2D shapes, they're all like swirly, so you could build up that big twisty candlestick thing or whatever it was. I'm usually thinking of a cube with lots of swirls in it for turbulent flow. The cube with lots of swirls in it, what does it do? All right, well, what we see on the surface is a load of 2D shapes swirling. They are all continuous. I'd love to see how that looks if you were to like stack up all the images that a window into a liquid full of turbulent flow. What does that look like? I don't know. As it stands, it's a bit of a weird one. Why it wants to, or why it does, cycle through all these states. It seems like kind of hyper chaotic. I think if you throw your finger into a puddle that is turbulent flowing, you only add, momentum to the vectors that are going around in the water. How could it not be? I think so. I think you're always going to increase the momentum of something if you stick your finger into a turbulent flow instead of slow it down somehow. Although if you kept your finger still in there, then you'd slow it down. That's real interesting. It seems like wherever you put the force, it just translates it. And it could be really interesting if you wanted to design a universe from. Okay, so it would be really helpful if we could have like one principle that would just be enough to design everything that we see in the universe on. So what I'm looking for here, I'm starting to do this in math too, look for like a binary logic gate. I don't know if I'll show the thing that I wrote yesterday, but I keep on like pushing towards the end. It's saying, well, we've got this Euclidean space, and really all it can tell the difference between is straight lines and curved lines, and we've got a way to make a straight line and a curved line. So can I maybe make all the other theorems of Euclidean space out of these like tiny constructs, this world's shortest possible straight line and stuff? And I'm not sure, but turbulent flow, if we had just this idea of turbulent flow, I'm interested in how it works as like a MOF for movement, if I'm correct with what I've just said. That if you got turbulent flow around, well, it seems like it, doesn't it? That if you cool, it gives us a good referent for like contact. Because I'm saying if my finger is touching some liquid in turbulent flow, if it's stopped, that should slow down the forces in the fluid. And if it's moving, it should speed it up. And any of those momenta, they would be translated as randomly as you can get. Now, it can't be randomly. So it's a function, it's a process. And I think it's a process we don't yet know because I don't think anything we know describes that kind of shape. It's so lovely. If I had like 99% of a fish tank all moving around in turbulent flow, then you'd always expect that last bit, that last bit wants to go into turbulent flow. Everything around it is moving that way. And that last bit is going to put up a little bit of resistance, like the finger that we would put in there. And if it can be cajoled into making that nice turbulent flow pattern, then it can. There is no light. Such a lie. Look at her. Okay, there is light. That's great. I'm like in an X-ray. And the stars. Okay. Turbulent flow. So you could like obviously imagine all the space being the lightest possible stuff in turbulent flow, but when then you put anything in it, if it's moving, it's going to be speeding up. And what do we mean moving? We mean moving with respect to the fluid that's in turbulent flow, but something's a little bit wrong here, because I want to say, well, my big heavy photon that I put in this pile of fluid, that's going to be less moving. Yeah, that's going to be less moving than the pile of turbulent flow stuff that I was thinking about. So isn't that like it's moving? Isn't it still going to rub off against it? And no, because I'm using it the wrong way. Do I want it so that if I add a photon to this juice, the juice stops running? That also makes some kind of sense, doesn't it? I don't like it, but it makes some kind of sense. I really don't like it, but it makes some kind of sense. Why are you judging what could be just how the universe works at a very small scale? What, that space is in turbulent flow? Why would space be in turbulent flow? Because it's really going in a dimension that's bigger than any of the dimensions that we can see. What do you mean, bigger dimension than anyone? Like more complexly dimensional space. That whenever this goop moves in like one dimension, we never see that. But it takes a few dimensions of synchronicity amongst this goop for it to make something that's like something that we can interact with, which is big and usually three-dimensional, and that about covers why that. So do I think that, let's just take this lightest layer of space-time stuff, and yeah, I mean, I have always imagined that the light is moving out in something that is now very similar to what is a line of turbulent flow. What is a line of turbulent flow? It would look like the most random thing, that there would be all these deviations that you could never check. Yeah, because it would always be a function of stuff that's beside it and further beside it, and no matter how much of a sort of tract of a fluid in turbulent flow that you looked at, you would never be able to be really sure that like something from a little bit further out wasn't about to affect the bit that you had right in the center. Um, hmm. So does each piece of light have like a special barcode on it? So each one is completely unique. I mean, maybe. That sounds cool now I think of it. And why would we see it as all like perfectly the same? Because we're standing in unique positions? That's not really my answer. Um, Maybe. Well, it seems like there would be an imperative just not to carry around so much junk information. That even if light shooting out of the beginning of the universe would have all these marks on it where it tried to turbulent flow. Why do I think this? Because if you look at a street light, you can see that the light sets out at 90 degrees for a little bit. You see the sphere around it where not only is everything going out like in the sphere, but also from the sphere, it's going and like everything is 90 degreesy about it. And very regular, yeah. Maybe only regular from this height, and then if you were really, really, really microscopic, like sublight microscopic or somewhere near there, you would see that light wherever it wants to go goes out in 90 degrees all the time, and just turns out that only in a straight line is what you can trace, because you're going to need to see two waves in a row, or maybe little individual planks are always shooting off, um, just seeing if there's anything there, kind of thing. And they would never add up to anything, because to resonate anything, you would need something that resonates at I want like amp, but for light, one lamp. What's one lamp? Where light hits a thing? No, no, you just described it better than that. What's a lamp? An amp, but for light. I'm not sure about that. That sounds like dodgy physics. I like turbulent flow in a line though. It would be the most random thing you could think of on a line, and you'd never be able to guess it from 1D what's going to happen. You'd always need 2D for stuff to happen. Okay, so now come back to... I've got this idea that like space is wavier than any of the matter. The matter is when some good things line up within the wavy world of like electrons and stuff, where the usual rules about space don't apply. But when we say the usual rules about space don't apply, they totally do. It's just we're talking about things that they're only made of 2 dimensions. And so when we think of things in a 3D world, it's all the same, except we've got one extra constraint on everything. And when we've got one extra constraint on everything, that obviously means like our sensors and the tools we make to use sensors and everything we see is all going to have in common that it behaves similarly on this one particular axis. But then we think about like, well, what is the matter made of? Or we think, what's the space like? Or how do we explain light that doesn't really seem to, well, it doesn't occupy the same world where everything's made of 3D and advanced. It gets the capacity to move through different ways that we don't see very intuitively with our big clunky 3D eyes. I don't know how to feel about, maybe having found, well, look, that's why Euclidean geometry has a problem, because you're trying to prove everything about the 2D space within a 2D space, and that would imply that there is no 3D space. If any system of mathematics can completely describe itself, either it describes everything or it implies that there is nothing else apart from that mathematics and apart from what it is referred to. So that's good. We don't want Euclidean geometry describing how it was made. It should have a hole in it. It should say, hey, there's more than just 2D stuff. You can't use 2D stuff to prove all the 2D stuff because the 2D stuff is in a 3D world. Yeah? Do I think so? Do I think that in a 2D world, what, geometry would be different? Yeah, of course, because you wouldn't have any circles. You would have 2D points, but you wouldn't have any way to relate them. And so we get into problems on the 2D plane when we isolate a single point, and then we look at points nearby which are related to it, and we're like, hey, are you a 2D point or are you related to something? And if so, what's your relation to things? Well, you don't have a word for that. Yeah, that seems okay. Well, that would be an interesting thing to have done. Found a hole in Euclidean geometry for a moment, just for I don't know, 5 minutes after I wrote, and so then there's a paradox. I'm like, no, everything I've tried to prove against, and then just immediately it's like, oh wait, no, it's because we're only in 2 dimensions here. And there's more that goes on when we draw stuff on the plane, and there's more stuff that goes on before we draw stuff on the plane, which is, I guess, 4D, the possibility of all the things we could draw on the plane. That matters before we do it. That's kind of an interesting thought you had there, that 4D on the plane doesn't have to look like it does. In 3D, it can look like all the stuff already being represented, because isn't that what we wanted for turbulent flow? It is, yeah. It is interesting. What do I mean? If I have a 2D plane, I've got a load of individual points on it. They've all got a location. None of them say to whom are they connected, and that's required to tell the difference between if it's a square or if it's a curve. So we think about, well, if there's a point there and it's if there's a point there and it's in a square or it's in a curve, to say all of that is a 3D function. And then the possibility space of 3D functions is the 4D zone, where we could just imagine that the Euclidean plane is colored in with every tracing you can make, and it's all and it's like it's got every possibility on it. That would be the all function of the 3 plot that had 2 points that also had relations between them. Do I have to worry about how many relations things have? In general, that would make a difference to dimensionality, right? As long as in the 3D zone, we could always say this guy is connected to a next one, right? If we had, when everything's on the page, we don't have any idea of ordering. So if we just have the dots, and I'm saying the dots by themselves before you read any lines into them, or even angles, I guess, except for maybe that one little squidgy angle at the bottom. What if you had all of those? Then there's no suggestion of ordering. What I really want to make it a 3D territory and to make each point have now a relationship to another point so that I can say whether it's a line or a circle. What I want is that relation. And so is that relation what I'm saying makes it 3D? Because if I really want each point, I think I can do it. If I want each point to say, well, I'm this point and my neighbor is this point, I can do that, but then my neighbor, actually, I need to represent it in 2 integers. So I would already be 4D by the time I was talking about here's a point that's next to this point. Yeah. If I wanted to take 2D points and they're all just locations on a plane and they don't have any relation to each other, apart from what the plane tells us, which the points don't know, and that's what we're working and using and calling upon, but we don't have access to it in those points. If I wanted to make those points into 3D, say I've got a load of points, I want to say each one has a neighbor, I can do that. What would happen if I just only add 1 integer to each of those 2D flat isolated points? I mean, that means that I'm allowed to set up some kind of, they go left or right. I think I might be particularly interested in this case because there's no way to scoop everything down in the right order. There might be a way to take a 3D glimpse of a 4D thing, or a 2D glimpse of a 3D thing. But there's never a way to preserve the order when you did that. That's exactly what you mean when you've cut out a dimension, you've cut out one ordering. So the result is definitely not allowed to be the opposite of whatever order was going in. It's not allowed to be the opposite with like one thing missing, one thing different. It's got to be the most crazy random path you can think of. It's what happens. Have I said why? Because you've lost one of the orderings. Yeah, but why does it do that magnificent pattern? Because you've lost one of the orderings, and that's just the basic shape of stuff. A turbulent flow right at the bottom that says movement increases movement. I like it. Sorry for this creepy video. Anything else? I'm interested in this. There's always got to be a certain size where you can't tell the difference between a circle and a polygon. It seems like there's that size at the top and there's that size at the bottom. Is a sphere ever a polygon in a higher space? No, because you'd be introducing salience. Do you ever introduce salience by going up at a higher space? That sounds like a yes. Let's think. If I've got a circle and I make it into a sphere, I don't have any salient right there, but I have the possibility of a salient where I rip open the sphere, I lay it flat, and then I just take the point that's at the center. There's always a way to do that. It's always arbitrary. It's basically the same as saying I can find an arbitrary point on the surface of a sphere, which isn't really what I mean by adding a salient. But what if what I've kind of described there is going up into a sphere and then crushing it down into a plane again? That would introduce a salient. Seems relevant. Oh, wow. From a logical perspective, the addition of a salient, whether it's to increase accuracy or whether it's to make an assumption, is the same thing. Either way, it gives you more consequences, more, should we say, like, inspiration. It gives you more inspiration. Okay, this is probably too good for this part of this video in particular, but if you take the world that logic talks about before you put any symbols down, right? All of the logical symbols, they sort of describe the same world. If you don't put any axioms, down at the beginning. You've kind of got the most expansive open world where like anything can be true, nothing can contradict that. If anything's possible, it's possible before you write any logic symbols down. And then if you put an axiom, you restrain the universe that you're talking about. You say, or constrain it, you say, there's the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So you can start there and build loads of things with straight lines. But equally, someone can come and say, like, wherever there's 2 points, there's this surface that has no straight line between them. And say if you manage to say that without saying straight line between them, you would have 2 descriptions of the same universe which are completely opposite. And let's say you can do this for any axiom. You can always have, I call it the converse model, where for each axiom you replace it with the opposite statement. And well, we have for a start that supposing when I said different ways, you said straight line and surface with this little sliver out of it. You should always be able to prove that one is the same as the other. In what vocabulary? Because these are both irreducibles. Yeah, so when I build up from straight lines and I build up from letterbox surfaces, I mean, I can find a thing that says I need a straight line or letterbox surface to satisfy me in both cases, right? Yeah, how do you draw that conceptual link? Because you're thinking about completely different spaces if you're just imagining them. How do you find that link? Surely it can be done. Out of basic terms, is it that like everything that you say about lines is going to simplify too quickly before you get to the letterbox scenario? What happens if I say there is a letterbox scenario? If you say there is a letterbox scenario in this language, you're just saying it's a space with not a straight line in it. And because you said not a straight line in it, what? It's not going to be a proof? It is going to be a proof. You just stated the contrapositor. The main reason I think about converse models is that in our world, some stuff is really, really messed up. I think that's to do with we try and explain stuff, and we try and make plans, and we try and enact plans. But they've always got this backwards shadow of what like they also mean. And the more inaccurate your plan in its conception, the more what it also means is also the stuff that enacts. Because you did the thing that makes all of these things happen, but we only knew the front part. And so we get like half of a plan in action. Also, that back part. And then when several plans come together, and maybe they're all supposed to be like lasting plans, and let's try and make this work out, you also get lots of halves and three-quarterses, and it's not good to count them. The backs of these models that are also put into effect. And then those entities, these enacted bits of plans that you could have described another way and said, like, well, actually, this is what's going on. They join together the backs of plans, the unintended consequences, and they can become like as strong and as designed seeming as a really good plan, or even better, because the plans are all kind of faulty, but these guys stick together immaculately. I think it's how fascism takes over. I think we're surrounded in fascism. I can see out my window. Um, I think that's how it comes to be, that from the back of explanations come half-baked plans, which come with unintended consequences, which are turned into unintended mechanisms, which those mechanisms as manifest things, shapes and catches and stuff, they can pull up together, and the least worrying unintended consequences we would correct immediately, but the more subtle ones and the more rooted ones, they would be harder to correct. The best thing that converse models got me in math was that just for any axiom system, you can always reduce it to one sentence with a string of and through it, and begin to get everything through modest ponens. Let's think about where I want to go next, because I've got a lot of stuff that seems quite turbulent from the last days, and not laminar. And wow, if we could get it laminar, it'd be like a laser. Where do I want to go? Well, PMP. Am I interested in it now that I feel close to it? It's the PMP I've always just been convinced of, because you only need a certain amount of characters to get, like, my proof, I don't think would satisfy anyone. My proof that satisfies me very well is that well, are there any primes is a question that's categorically P, and find me all the primes is not going to be P. It's going to be NP at least. And you say, are there any primes? You require the integers up to 4 and like repeated addition, and not to describe that and to find the answer. But find me all the primes, you need to say all the integers. You need to check all the integers from the beginning. Or at least the question asks you to find all the integers at the beginning. So I find that they're different kinds of question then. I don't think that's going to satisfy anyone. The areas thing, no, I don't expect anyone to look at that and think that I'd really done it. The thing that you said yourself the other night on the voice recordy thing, to if you can just state a P question and an NP question, doesn't matter really what they are in terms of inline logic, keeping count of complexity, that would be the proof of that. Yeah. Like, well, why doesn't it give us some great insight? It's because it's obvious if you already have the system of inline logic, and that would be the insight thing. So is it BNP? Yeah, sure. Because what we really want to do is build up that system of logic anyway. That's what we want to do. So if we can start at E-proofs, it's not going to take very long to go up through to get a circle. Yeah, you already got it. What did you just do? I figured out how I'm going to put the circle out of logic. How? Distances, sort of bound collections of points. Yeah. Distances measure bound collections of points. The coprimes, we've got the idea of a cycle if we've got the two orderings, and then we figure out a particular kind of cycle that goes through all the coprimes. How are you going to describe the coprimes, my love? That's a good question. The things that can possibly be wavelets when they ping around? Yeah, you needed another way to talk about that. Guess what happened in the last couple of days? You got another way to talk about that. That's really good. Yeah, what's the ratio between... So that's all of that. You can carry on from where you are. Just blow everyone's mind that it started out looking like it was really, really sloppy, and then it went into... And here's the logic you've been looking for if you're looking for mathematical logic. Peace and blessings be upon you. What a good idea. Salam.